a researcher decided to do something very few people would ever dare to do. He spent months interviewing more than 400 prostitutes. Not driven by curiosity, not driven by scandal. He was driven by a silent obsession to discover what makes a man lose value in a woman's eyes. And what he found was far more disturbing than he imagined. Most men believe a woman loses desire because of one single mistake. A bad message, a date that went wrong, a poorly chosen sentence. But no, what this researcher discovered is that loss of value doesn't happen with noise. It happens in silence. It's gradual, almost invisible until one day she simply sees you with different eyes, and you have no idea why. Here's the brutal part. It doesn't matter how much emotional energy you invest. It doesn't matter how hard you try to please her. It doesn't matter how present you are. If you send the wrong signals, desire shuts off. Not slowly, instantly. And the most painful part, not even she can explain it. Her body reacts before her mind understands. The Machiavellian principle. Machiavelli would have understood this immediately because for him, power is not lost through great defeats, but through tiny gestures that reveal weakness. And when a man acts from need, from fear of losing, he has already started losing. This video is not for the man who wants to please. It is for the man who wants to understand. Because female desire, like political power, is not fair, is not logical, is biological, and anyone who does not understand the invisible rules is destined to be discarded without explanation. Today, I am not going to tell you how to make a woman like you. I'm going to show you which behaviors destroy your value, even when you believe you are doing everything right. Because the enemy is not your body, not your money. The enemy is what you communicate without realizing it. And if you are willing to see the truth without anesthesia, by the end of this video, you will understand something almost nobody knows. How to never lose value. And in this world, that is worth more than any approval. The invisible mistakes. Most men lose value not when they are rejected, but long before. They lose it in invisible gestures, in poorly handled silence, in microactions that expose anxiety. They lose it when they stop being a stimulus and become emotional spectators. One of the most common mistakes is early emotional overexposure. Showing too much interest too fast is read by a woman's body as a lack of options. Female desire at a biological level does not respond to abundance. It responds to scarcity, to seductiveness, to what makes itself desired. Another silent mistake, being too available, replying instantly, canceling plans just to see her, restructuring your life around her schedule. All of that sends a subconscious message. I have nothing more important than you. And even though it sounds romantic, it actually lowers your perceived value because it projects a lack of personal direction. And the worst mistake of all, constantly seeking validation, asking if she likes you, fishing for reassurance, fearing the loss of her attention. That anxious energy does not go unnoticed. It is felt, and it doesn't matter what you say. If your energy says, I need you to choose me, desire collapses. The power of projection. This is where Machiavelli enters. He understood that power is not begged for. It is projected. And when a man operates from insecurity, every word he speaks, no matter how logical, loses weight. Because value is not communicated through arguments. It is communicated through presence, through control, through posture. Loss of value does not always show up as direct rejection. Sometimes she simply starts ignoring you. She laughs less. She takes longer to reply. Small shifts you don't know how to interpret, but they destabilize you. And then you make another fatal mistake. You try to compensate. More messages, more effort, more attention. But that effort only proves one thing. You are desperate to recover an interest that is already evaporating, and she doesn't need to say it. She never will. Her body language, her tone, her attitude, they are screaming it. Here is the key point. Female desire is not democratic. You cannot negotiate to keep it. You cannot argue your way into it. You can only understand what activates it and what kills it. What activates and kills desire? What activates it is simple. Perceived power, centered energy, emotional independence. What kills it? Neediness, anxiety, dependency, lack of inner structure. This is not about pretending to be a bad boy. It is about projecting real internal control. Because when you lose your center, you lose the game. And the problem is most men don't even realize they've lost it. They operate from fear without calling it fear. They act from need without admitting it. And step by step, they lose value in the eyes of a woman who is biologically wired to feel it without thinking. Has it ever happened to you? A woman seems interested at first, and then suddenly she goes cold. No obvious reason. It wasn't random. At some point, you sent signals that lowered your value, and you didn't know how to read them. Nonverbal communication. That's the power of nonverbal communication. A tone of voice, an avoiding glance, an insecure laugh, slouched posture. All of that communicates more than 1,000 words, and her limbic system picks it up instantly. The man who constantly adapts, who reshapes himself based on her reactions, stops being a source of desire and becomes a functional figure, an emotional companion. A good guy who inspires comfort but not fire. And the most cruel part, she may actually appreciate you but not desire you. She can talk to you for hours, trust you with secrets, thank you for your attention, and at the same time never imagine you in her bed, not because there is no connection, but because there is no magnetism. Machiavelli would tell you, he who seeks to be loved more than feared will end up being ignored. This is not about creating literal fear. It is about projecting an energy that commands respect. And from that, desire is born. Because respect always comes before desire. In this section, we've only scratched the surface. But if you're starting to grasp this, you're already ahead of 90% of men. What kills desire is not your essence. It is your dependence, not your personality, but your need for validation. And most important of all, it is not she who decides that you lose value. It is your silent behavior that hands it over. The research study. For several months, a social psychologist conducted one of the most uncomfortable and revealing studies ever recorded. He interviewed and observed the dynamics of more than 400 prostitutes, not out of morbid curiosity, not to judge their profession, but to understand how female desire shifts based on the energy of the men who visit them. Because even in a transactional sexual environment, desire, attraction, and value perception still operate. And what he discovered was shocking. The women charged the same. They offered the same service. But they did not respond the same way to every man. Sometimes they felt more attracted, more engaged, more connected. Why? If the service was identical, what made certain men desirable even in a paid environment? The answer is brutal. The invisible language of power. Those men were not necessarily more handsome, not taller, not richer, but they projected something different. Centered energy, contained masculinity, a calm confidence that did not need explanation. Prostitutes, women trained to interact with hundreds of men without emotional involvement, reported feeling more attracted, more open, and even more respectful toward men who did not come seeking validation, but came projecting control. In some cases, they even admitted feeling nervous around certain men, not from fear, but from the intensity of their presence. And the most fascinating part, these reactions were not rational. They were visceral, automatic. The pattern emerges. When the recorded sessions were analyzed, a clear pattern emerged. Men did not lose value because of what they said, but because of what they communicated without speaking. Nervous movements, collapsed posture, people-pleasing behavior, insecure jokes, all of it created a low-value perception, even while paying. One detail froze the researchers. Some workers admitted that although they pretended interest with everyone, they only genuinely felt it with certain men. And those men were not always the most attractive, not the richest, not the most talkative, they were the most centered. So what did these standout men have in common? They did not seek approval. They did not display anxiety. They maintained eye contact without trying to dominate. They moved slowly, calmly, not rushed. They behaved as if their presence alone was already enough. And this is where Machiavelli enters. He would have said, "He who controls perception controls the interaction." These men were not begging. They were positioned. Their value was not sold. It was felt. They did not explain who they were. They did not try to convince. They were the argument, the internal structure. And the most interesting part, many of them didn't even know it. They were not performing. They were simply that way. They had developed a strong internal structure, a core that did not need validation to exist, and that even in the most artificial environment of desire, still triggered the same biological responses. Because a woman's body never fully disconnects, not even when sex is paid for, the body always responds to signals. The study also revealed something disturbing. The men who tried hardest to please were the ones who generated the least desire. The more effort they put into being nice, talkative, complimentary, the less impact they had. And that confirms one of the hardest truths a man can face. Female desire does not reward emotional effort. It rewards perceived power. One testimony said everything. There are clients who treat me like a queen, but I struggle to stay interested. And there are others who barely speak, but they make me feel observed, emotionally naked, as if they can read me. That is not coincidence. That is biology, responding to signals. Universal principles. And what works on prostitutes, women trained to detach from desire, works even more strongly on ordinary women. Because if they in an environment where desire should be fake are still vulnerable to signals of masculine power. Imagine what happens in real relationships. This experiment makes one thing clear. Male value is not defined by context. It is projected from the core. You can have money. You can have looks. But if your energy communicates insecurity, it is felt. And if your energy communicates silent dominance, that is felt too. This is not about manipulation. It is about understanding. Understanding how certain postures, gestures, attitudes activate in the female mind a response. Even she cannot explain because when a woman says there's something about him, I don't know what it is, but I'm attracted. She is talking about this. Machiavelli did not write about dating. He did not talk about attraction or female desire. He wrote about rulers, about power, about control. But when his principles are applied to desire, they become a weapon. Because Machiavelli understood something most men still don't. Power is not what you have. Power is what you project. Machiavellian wisdom applied. In The Prince, he wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." This does not mean cruelty. It means inner structure. It means being perceived as someone who does not collapse under external judgment. And in the female mind, that translates into desire. A woman may love the man she admires, but she only desires the man she respects. And respect is not born from compliments, not from excessive softness. It is born from contained energy, from self-control, from the conviction of a man who walks through the world without asking permission to exist. Machiavelli observed that the most respected leaders were not the nicest ones. They were the most emotionally stable, the ones who did not react with anxiety, the ones who kept their center even in chaos. And is that not the most magnetic quality a man can possess? In the realm of desire, this is law. A woman reacts to how you react to the world. If she perceives you as easily shaken, if everything she says or does controls your emotional state, if your inner stability depends on her approval, it doesn't matter how handsome you are, you lose value. Machiavelli would say the most effective power is the one that does not need to be demonstrated, the one that is perceived, the one that radiates without explanation. And that is exactly what happens with men who trigger desire without speaking. Their presence alone is already a statement. The evolutionary connection. Now ask yourself, why does this Machiavellian vision connect so deeply with female desire? Because attraction is not a surface emotion. It is an evolutionary response to internal leadership. A woman does not logically search for a strong man. Her biology detects it in milliseconds. She feels it in your posture, in your voice, in your rhythm. And that feeling is not manufactured with lines or techniques. It is built through perceived value. Machiavelli would explain it like this. Men judge more by the eyes than by the hands. For everyone can see, but few can touch. Translated into desire. A woman does not need to know you deeply to decide if she desires you. She only needs to perceive something she cannot explain. Presence, energy, direction. And that perception is not created by your clothes, not by your money. It is created by your internal state. Here is where most men fail. They try to build attraction through logic, through emotional explanations, through people-pleasing. But female desire is not born in the mind. It is born in the body, in the limbic system. And that system does not respond to arguments. It responds to signals, perception, and positioning. That is why if Machiavelli were alive today, he would not write dating books. He would write manuals on perception, on body language, on energetic positioning. Because for him, what mattered most was not being good, but appearing valuable. Not through deception, but through strategy. This is not about manipulation. It is about understanding how human perception works. Because even if you are an honest man, hardworking, generous, if you do not project energy, dominance, and direction, her body will not register you as desirable. She may see you as safe, as reliable, but not as magnetic. Here is another key Machiavellian principle. Human nature is ungrateful. People lean more toward the one who imposes than the one who begs. Applied to desire, the more you plead, the less you provoke. The more you try to please, the deeper you sink. The more you depend on her attention, the less attention you deserve. Machiavelli also said, "Men offend sooner the one they love than the one they fear." Uncomfortable, but true. Female desire collapses when she perceives that she can dominate you emotionally, that your stability depends on her. And in that moment, without realizing it, you stop being a challenge and become an emotional tool. Do you see it? Everything Machiavelli taught about politics applies to desire because desire is a game of hierarchy, of positioning, of silent power. And if you don't know how to play it, you end up competing with nice guy gestures, while she feels drawn to the man who isn't trying to impress her. The Machiavellian man is not cruel. He is not abusive. He is the man who does not need validation to act. He inspires respect without forcing it. He walks with a level of conviction that makes her follow even if she doesn't know why. And in the world of desire, that is an advantage few understand, and almost no one masters. Before you say your first word, you have already been evaluated. Not by what you think, not by what you plan to say, but by something older, more brutal, more honest. Your nonverbal language. If you learned something from this video, do not forget it. What you emit without speaking determines whether you are desired or ignored. Subscribe if you want to learn more hidden codes of desire and power. Share this video if you know someone who needs to wake up. And remember, you don't have to be perfect. You only have to be impossible to ignore.